Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of The Suited Shootist. And as promised, what I want to touch on this week is the important differences between style and fashion. And it was something I was talking about in last week's video. And last week I was touching on how when guys dismiss the idea of dressing well as stating, well, I don't care, generally it's not that they don't care, it's that they are either afraid of looking foolish or they just want to be lazy and they don't want to put the effort in because they're scared of the expectations that come along with dressing well. So, what I think is really critical is if you are interested in improving your own style, it helps to understand the difference between that and fashion because it's very easy to get led astray. And to start off, style is where I really think that most people should spend their efforts because style is very personal. It is it's an internal source. It is branding. It is your expression of who you are and how you choose to represent that out in the world. And this outfit is kind of a good example. It's a good representation of my attitudes toward it because there are a couple of kind of anachronisms that don't necessarily or shouldn't go together, but just because it jives with my overall attitude, I'm able to make it work. And none of it is so, grossly off base that it doesn't look like I know what I'm doing, but they certainly sort of buck the rules of convention. And what I mean by that is if I kind of give you an up close look, you know, yeah, I'm wearing a jacket and a dress shirt, but this is a much coarser kind of flannel texture to the jacket, which immediately makes it less formal, as do the fact that this is kind of a mid-wash denim. So those two aspects of it immediately make this less dressy. And the interesting thing is that I counteract that with the fact that while this is not a formal dress shirt, because it's not kind of one of your typical formal colors, it is French cuffed. And generally, you don't necessarily see cufflinks with something like a sports jacket. Now, obviously it's going to depend on the appropriate settings and venues to wear something like this as a combination. But it's just one of those things to consider where once you understand kind of what those general guidelines are, it's a lot like jazz. Once you know the rules, if you break them intentionally, then that comes across as artful expression, not lack of knowledge. But the challenge is that style is that very personal thing that allows you to break the rules intentionally. Fashion is much more sort of externally influenced. That's the runway show type of stuff. And with fashion, there's not rules per se, but there are trends. And if you deviate from the trend, it's no longer in fashion. And the kind of the guideline that I think really helps drive this point home is the easiest way to delineate between fashion and style is if the element in question is readily identifiable or evocative of a specific time period, then more often than not, that's fashion, not style. And here's what I mean. Bell bottoms or hammer pants or Jinko jeans, 70s, 80s, 90s. Now, some of those things are starting to come back around, but those are good examples where if you see somebody dressed like that and you immediately jump to a time period, it tends to be more fashion. One of the real easy examples, and again, a big mistake that I see a lot of guys make is when it comes to neckwear. You've got these really boisterous, loud ties. This one I might be able to make work, but any of those real hard geometrics or kind of the abstract artwork, this stuff is quintessential 90s. And if you are somebody that is going to follow trends, it may be worth having because, again, supposedly they're kind of coming back in vogue a little bit. But if you don't find yourself wearing formal clothing all that often, then stuff that's only going to be really topical for 6 months at a time every 10 years is not going to be the best investment for your resources. And so that's where books like Dressing the Man or Tanner Guzy's Appearance of Power really become useful because they allow you to better develop your own personal sense of style. And, because otherwise, most people will tend to then gravitate towards media in order to kind of influence how they dress. And the challenge is with a lot of that, it tends to be more fashion heavy than it does style heavy. Two good examples of this. Um, One of them was I was scrolling through Instagram, I think, the other day, and one of the style pages that popped up on my reels, quite literally, it was how to dress like this character from Peaky Blinders. And I mean, that right there, I think, is a huge mistake. Anytime you are trying to dress like a character, it is inherently a costume because you're dressing like somebody else. It's not authentic to who you are. I've talked previously about how I have elements of my closet that I either borrowed or directly ripped off from like Steve McQueen, but I'm not dressing like his character from The Great Escape. It was one of those things that I incorporated into my wardrobe and it just kind of worked for me. But, wearing three-piece tweed suits and scally caps and shirts with club collars, all of that together is such a dated look that unless you have a whole lot of unless you got a whole lot of chops, it's going to look authentic. It's going to look like you're playing dress up. And that's what you're trying to avoid because one of the biggest fears that keeps men from trying to dress better is the fear of looking foolish. And that's exactly how you look foolish, is trying to dress like somebody else. Another good example was the USA show White Collar. Love the show. Um, but the main character was intentionally wearing, 1950s vintage Rat Pack era stuff. Now, it was very much playing into sort of the overall um, vibe of the show, where it was supposed to be very slick, very Rat Packy. And so the fact that he was wearing the skinny ties and the fedora and all that played with it. And it was authentic to the con man character. But there's a reason why hipsters tend to be the punchline to a lot of jokes, is because the whole skinny tie affected vintage thing is a real easy way to look like you're trying to dress like somebody else, not yourself. Another big thing that a lot of guys don't realize, just like with neckties, I think neckties are neckties. I think jackets are jackets. Depending on the cut of the jacket is one of those things that can get you in trouble. And mostly it has to do with the lapel. Two things in particular: the lapel width and the height of the gorge. Realistically, this one is kind of right on the cusp. If it was any lower, or if it was this height and the lapel being a notch lapel was any wider, it would definitely look dated, probably 80s, 90s kind of thing. The 80s also known for the really aggressively padded shoulders. So those are the things to kind of be on the lookout for. And the unfortunate reality of it is that it requires a bit of understanding to do well. You can't just go into, you know, you can get away with it if you're going into the safe bets, the big box menswear stores where you're not likely to really find anything of particularly high quality. But if you're buying consignment or secondhand, like I care to do, or if you are kind of going into the deeper end and you're getting customer bespoke clothing, you got to be careful. Now, realistically, most of the folks that are here watching this probably not yet jumping into the deep end of having anything custom made. Because if you are, you're enough of a geek to where you probably have an understanding of some of the finer points of that. But if you're working on a budget, you're trying to dress better, but you're not trying to blow a whole bunch of money doing it, and so you're going consignment, you're going secondhand and thrift and stuff like that, you got to know what to look out for because you got to know what to avoid. And so having that understanding of the proportions and things like that will allow you, with a minimal investment of time, to have a minimal investment of money and get a fairly versatile wardrobe on hand. So I'm very curious to know what questions you have in terms of, excuse me, style versus fashion. Are you trying to figure that out? Have you landed on kind of what you feel like your personal style is? I want to hear that down in the comments. Have you made any of these egregious style mistakes? The one that I was probably most recently guilty of were those sateen finish, solid jewel tone colored shirts. Um, yeah, those are just absolutely atrocious. And again, very much a very dated kind of 90s and early 2000s era look. So what are some of your biggest mistakes and faux pas that you've made? I want to hear about those too. Because, again, we can all have a good laugh over it. Outside of that, the other kind of piece of encouragement that I'll give you is this whole thing is a process. I know I've been teasing a little bit, but we're putting the finishing touches on the latest custom jacket that I'm getting from Adam Ross. And I made a mistake. I made a mistake in the design. It's totally on me, and I'm somebody that's a little more of a geek about this kind of stuff. So there's always something else to learn. But aside from that, I hope everybody has a fantastic week. Stay dangerous and stay sharp.